Good evening. Welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV. I am Karen Tan. Our program, as usual, begins today also with invoking blessings for the happiness and well-being of everyone. This chanting is conducted by Venerable Thai Buddhist monks.
นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโต
อะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะ
พุทธังสรณัง
คัจฉามิธัมมังสรณังคัจฉามิสังฆังสรณังคัจฉามิทุติยมปิพุทธังสรณังคัจฉามิทุติยมปิธัมมังสรณังคัจฉามิทุติยมปิสังฆังสรณังคัจฉามิตติยมปิพุทธังสรณังคัจฉามิตติยมปิธัมมังสรณังคัจฉามิตติยมปิสังฆังสรณังคัจฉามิ
สัมพุทเท
อัตถวีสัญจะทวาทสัญจะสหัสสเกปัญจะสตัสสหัสสานินามามิสิรสาอะหังเตสังธรรมันจะสังขันจะอาทะเลนะนามามิหังนามการานุภาเวนะหันตวาสัพเพอุปัฏฐเวอเนกาอันตรายาปิวินาสันตุอาเสสะโตสัมพุทเทปัญจปัญญาสันจะจตุวีสติสหัสสเกทัสสะสตัสสหัสสานินามามิสิรสาอะหังเตสังธรรมันจะสังขันจะอาทะเลนะนามามิหังนามการานุภาเวนะหันตวาสัพเพอุปัฏฐเวอเนกาอันตรายาปิวินาสันตุอาเสสะโตสัมพุทเทนวุตรสเตอัตตจัตตาริสัสหัสสเกวิสติสตัสสหัสสานินามามิสิรสาอะหังเตสังธรรมันจะสังขันจะอาทะเรนะนามามิหังนามการานุภาเวนะหันตวาสัพเพอุปัฏฐเวอเนกาอันตรายาปิวินาสันตุอาเสสัตโต
นะโมอะระหะโต
สัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะมะเหสิโนนะโมอุตตมธัมมัสสะสวากขาตัสเสวะเตนิทันนะโมมหาสังฆัสสะปิวิสุทธัสสีลทิติโนนะโมโอมาตยารัตตัสสะรัตนาตยาสัสสาธุกังนะโมโอมกาติตาสตัสสวัตถุตยาสปินะโมการัปปภาเวนะวิคาชันตุปัฏฐ วานะโมการานุภาเวนะสุวัตติโหตุสัพพทานะโมการาสเตเชนะวิคิมหิโหมิเตชวา
พหูเทวามนุสสาจะมังคลานิอจินตยุงอากังขมานาโสธานังปรหิมังคลมุตตมังอเสวนาจะพาลานังปันติตานันจะเสวนาปูชาจะปูชนียานังเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังปฏิรูปเทสวาโสจะปุเพจะกตปุญญาตาอัตตสัมมาปณิทิจะเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังพาหุสัจจันจะสิปัญจวินโยจะสุสิขิโตสุภาสิตาจะยาวาจาเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังมาตาปิตุอุปัฏฐานังปุตตธาราสสังฆโหอนาคุลาจะกัมมันตาเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังทานันจะธรรมจริยาจะยาตกานันจะสังฆโหอนวัชชานิกัมมานิเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังอารติวิรติปาปามัจจปานาจะสัญญโมอัปปมาทัวจะธรรมเมสุเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังคารวัวจะนิวาตัวจะสันตุทีจะกตัญยุตากาเลนะธรรมาสวนังเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังขันติจะโสวจัสสตาสมนานันจะทัสสนังกาเลนะธรรมสากัจฉาเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังตโปจะพรหมจริยันจะอริยสัจจานัทธัสสนังนิพพานสัจฉิกิริยาจะเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังพุทธัสสะโรกธรรมเมหิจิตตังยาสนกรรมปฏิอโศกังวิรชังเขมังเอตัมมังคลมุตตมังเอตาทิสานิกตวานสัตพาธรรมปราชิตาสัพพัทธโสทิงขาดฉันติตันเตสังฆังคลมุตตมันติ
In our upcoming segment, Venerable Dr. Bande Punaji articulates a compelling insight into a frequently asked question: what is Paticca Samuppada? Let us welcome the Venerable to elucidate on this topic. This section marks the first part of his enlightening sermon.
So now today we are going to talk about the Paticca Samuppada. Now how many of you have at least read what is called the Paticca Samuppada? I told you about a certain law of nature that people began to understand in the West. Around the the 10th century, yeah? And that was the time when science began in the West. And people began to understand this law, which is called determinism. Determinism means that whatever happens in the world, all natural phenomena, they are all determined by the presence of the necessary conditions. When the necessary conditions are present, it happens or it occurs. And when the necessary conditions are absent, it doesn't happen. Even if one condition is absent, it doesn't happen. That is the meaning of determinism. Understood? Now, when people began to realize this, they lost faith in the religious dogmas, because the religious dogmas were telling people that this world was created by a God and this God is controlling everything. So if there is lightning, if there is thunder, if there are earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, all that is done by God. But when these scientists began to understand this law of determinism, that everything that happens is happening only due to the presence of the necessary conditions, they lost faith in the religious dogmas. And as a result, revolutions took place, like the what revolution?
French.
Huh?
The French and the American.
French Revolution, Marxist Revolution, there was a British Revolution, and in these revolutions they started killing even the kings and even the ascetics. Not ascetics, the priests in the churches. So all these things happened because they lost faith in the religious dogmas. And this period is called the age of enlightenment. That is the time when people began to understand the realities of life. It was somewhere in the 20th century that Sigmund Freud began to see something else. That he saw that this same law is governing what we call the mind. Just as they saw that there is no God who created the world, Freud began to see that there is no self who does the thinking. Even the thinking, speaking and acting happens only due to the presence of the necessary conditions. So he called this psychic determinism. That's important to understand. That means that determinism is a law that is governing even the human mind. Although he used the words ego and superego, they were only words for him. Those words didn't represent a real self. He used this because when people talk about a self, there is only one thing that you can refer to as the self, and that is what is called the cognitive process, which is an activity of the brain. There is a special part of the brain that does the thinking, that is called the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex. And that is what can be called a self that is doing the thinking. If you want to use the word self, that is the only self which is simply a part of the body, not something outside the body. So, the thinking is done by that cerebral cortex, which is doing what is called cognition. And the Buddha pointed out that there are two processes going on which we refer to as the mind. Really, three processes. The first is the activity of the senses. When the senses are stimulated by the environment, light falling on the eye, sounds coming to the ears, smells coming to the nose, taste coming to the tongue, and touch coming to the body, all coming from the environment. And when the environment stimulates the senses react to the stimulus. And that reaction is what we call seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. We are organisms in an environment, and the organism reacts to the environmental stimulation. And that is how we become conscious of a world. But that consciousness is not coming from the senses. A chain reaction occurs in the body. That means a series of reactions occur in the body. The first reaction is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. That's the first reaction. Then the message goes from the senses to the brain, and the brain begins to think and give meaning to what was seen, heard, smelt, tasted, touched. And that giving meaning is what is called cognition. Those are words used by modern psychologists. And then, according to the meaning given an emotion is aroused, the emotional arousal comes from the meaning given. And then your emotion is expressed in action. The emotion is expressed in action. So we become conscious of a world, and not only conscious of a world, we become conscious of a self living in the world. So you see, these are three parts of this chain reaction. First comes perception, then comes cognition, then comes affection. The emotional arousal is called affection. And then comes action in the form of speech or physical behavior. If you first see some person and that person is doing something or speaking something, and then that is perception. The next is this message goes to the brain, and the brain begins to think and interpret what was done by that person. And if you interpret that as an insult to you, said something that is an insult to you, or did something that is disrespect for you, something like that, you interpret it like that. And the moment you interpret it like that, a message goes from the brain to a gland, and the gland secretes a hormone into the blood, and the blood carries this, the blood vessels carry it to the whole body, and changes take place in the body. And that is an emotional arousal. And in this case, it was anger. And when the mind became angry, now you act in the angry way. You start using bad language, and then you start fighting, and that is what anger is about. So that whole reaction is a chain reaction. One reaction followed by another reaction. It's a chain. Different links in the chain. So that reaction, you have to understand that properly. So for the purpose of speaking about it more easily, we divide this into two main actions. One is cognition and the other is affection. Cognition is the thinking part, and affection refers to the emotional arousal and the emotional behavior. So you see, so when we speak of the mind, that is all that we are referring to. The cognitive thinking part and the emotional arousal. Now, when we speak of emotions, we are only forming ideas, imagining. We are not referring to what is really going on in the body. What I just mentioned was what is really going on in the body. But normally people don't know what is really going on in the body. And so, the only words that normally people use is head and heart. The thinking part is called the head and the emotional part is called the heart. There is some connection between the head and the heart because the thinking is the activity of the brain. So it is correct to call it the head. And the emotional part is really the activity of the blood in the heart. So therefore, it is okay to call it the heart, the emotions. Now the important thing is that whole process is what the Buddha called dukkha or suffering. In other words, it is the reaction of the organism to stimulation. Now, in the animals, normally the lowest animals, they don't have emotions. Like even the fish doesn't have emotions. This is why it is easy for you to catch a fish. You put a bait on a thread and then throw it into the pond or wherever the fish you find, and then they'll come and swallow that. The moment it is swallowed, they are caught. So they will go on doing that, they will never learn that they are getting caught by swallowing this. They can't think and they don't have emotions. Now, if you see a frog inside the house, have you ever tried to chase that frog out of the house? You have never experienced that, huh? Never seen a frog.
In Sri Lanka, yes.
Huh?
In Sri Lanka.
In Sri Lanka you have seen. But if you try to chase the frog out, what happens? Huh?
Thank you. Jumps.
Huh?
Just jumps around.
No, the frog doesn't go away. It comes back again. Very difficult to get rid of that frog. That frog is not frightened. No emotions. The frog doesn't have any emotions. This is the reason. Huh? Emotions come only to higher animals. Because there is a part of the brain which is called the limbic system. And it is that part of the brain that is responsible for the emotions. How the animals like the dog, the cat, those are emotional animals. They have emotions. But they don't have this ability to think and reason out. In their brain, they don't have that cerebrum developed. So you see, it's only the brain is there, but they can't think and reason out like the human beings. It is the human being who has a well-developed cerebrum. So the human being can think and reason out. So this is why, but even in the human being, there is a nerve, because it is like the other animals, like the emotional animals, because they don't have to think. They act straight away, they act emotionally. The dog, hearing a sound, begins to bark. That is, you don't have to think for that. You just hear the sound and then straight away bark. Because the message goes to the gland, and the gland sends a message to the muscles, and the muscles become activated, and that is how the barking comes up. So you see, it's good to learn this body and how the brain works. Then you begin to understand this thing called mind and all these mental processes. The important thing is the human being also has that nerve that is sending the message straight from the sense organ, like the eye or the ear or something, and going straight to the muscles. Now this is why if you suddenly hear a big noise, you get excited. Why? Because the message goes, even before going to the brain to do the thinking, goes straight to the action part. Then later you go, there is nothing to get excited, it's only a noise coming from something. Then you begin to think and understand that. Then you calm down again. Now some of these psychologists have used a word to explain this. It is called a hijack. That means the brain has been hijacked. You know what a hijack is, huh? But then it is only temporary thing, because then the brain begins to understand what has happened, and then you calm down again. So the important thing is This whole reaction, this chain reaction is producing all the problems in the world. Crime, wars, killings, everything that is happening in the world, where human beings behave in certain ways and how animals behave in certain ways, all that is because of this reaction. That is the dukkha. So the Buddha decided the only way to solve this problem is that these human beings have to evolve further. It's evolution. Now, the scientists think that the modern human being is the most evolved animal. But the Buddha pointed out that this highest evolved animal has to evolve further. Only then that the crime, wars, terrorism, all these kinds of things will disappear. Only when the human being evolves. But this time the evolution is not a biological evolution. It has to become a psychological evolution. The biological evolution took place unconsciously. As Charles Darwin saw it, it came out as a struggle for existence. The struggle to exist. Because every individual organism, not only human beings, even animals and even plants, what are they doing? They're struggling to exist. Even plants are struggling to exist. They want to keep on existing. They don't want to die. Although they are struggling to exist, they have to somehow die. But the struggle is going on unconsciously. In the plants and even the animals. It is only in the human being that the human being is struggling to exist consciously. And it is the human being who is able to realize that he or she is struggling to exist. And not only struggling to exist, that the struggle is futile. And not only futile, it is also painful. You see, now the children are being looked after by the parents, so they don't see that there is a struggle. Because the parents will provide the food, clothing, shelter, even medicine when they are sick. So the children they are not aware of this. But when they grow up and become adults, then they begin to realize that they have to struggle to exist. And this is why they have to go to school and learn. If they are able to learn and something at least, they can do a job and get money. Otherwise, they'll have to do a job which is a menial job and get just a little money, just enough to maybe find food. But there are other things that they have to find. Food, they have to find clothing, they have to find shelter, and they have to find medicine. But there is another problem coming up. They have this, what is called this sexual appetite. So they want to begin to find partners to have sexual. And for that also you need money. You can't do it if you don't have money. So you see, so for everything you have to struggle. To get money you have to struggle. You have to do jobs. Whether you like it or not, you have to do it. You see, that whole life is a struggle to exist. And in spite of this struggle, you have to die. It's not only old people who die. Young people also die. Even children die. Even a child just born can die. Or a child can die even before birth, while in the mother's womb. You see, death, there is no time for death. It can come at any moment. This is the insecurity of life. The insecurity of life is because there is this struggle to exist, and at the same time there is death, which can come at any moment. This is the insecurity of life that the Buddha spoke of. And now people are gradually beginning to realize this. 100 years ago they didn't even want to think about it. Now some people are writing books about death and dying, about how to face death, how to go and talk to those who are about to die, and things like that. And children, they are never shown dead bodies. They don't take the children to funerals. So they don't know much about death. Of course, in the Eastern countries, they still have deaths at home. But here they never have a funeral at home. It's only in the funeral homes. And children are not taken there. So things like that, you see. But gradually people are beginning to realize or become aware of the realities of life. So the biggest problem is that people grow old, fall sick and die. This is what Prince Siddhartha saw. Because he was also not shown any of these things. As a child, he didn't know about that. He didn't know that he was going to die. And he didn't know that people in the world die or grow old. But gradually he began to know this. And he thought he must find a solution to this. And so that is why he set out. He thought that normal human beings, being subject to old age, disease and death, they go and become attached to things that are subject to old age. They cling to them. But he thought that is the wrong thing to do. You should learn to give up attachment to things that are subject to old age, disease and death. And people should learn to purify their minds. It is only by purifying the mind you can become happy. So he went to learn meditation from yogis at that time. And it is by learning meditation that he learned to enter the first jhana, the second jhana, which we call the ecstasy. The first ecstasy that we described last time, the second ecstasy, the third ecstasy, the fourth ecstasy. And at the fourth ecstasy, you stop the affective part, the emotional part. Actually, the emotions stop, because emotion is an activity, and that activity stops when you enter the first jhana, the first ecstasy. Ecstasy, I said, was standing out. What is the other word we use for standing out?
Transparent?
Huh?
Transparent?
What?
Transparent?
What?
Transcendence. Transcendence.
Transcend.
Yes.
Well, yes, but there is a simpler word It is to withdraw. You withdraw from. Say, this is the world of sensual living. You withdraw from that. You come out of that. So when you enter the first jhana, you have withdrawn from the sensual world of emotional excitements. You have withdrawn from emotional excitements. But when you enter the fourth jhana, all excitements completely disappear. And then you begin to withdraw from the cognitive activity. The cognitive process is the process that makes you think. And that thinking process begins to stop when you enter the sphere of infinite space or the realm of infinite space, the realm of perception. When you withdraw from the realm of perception, you withdraw from almost all experience, and there you come to what is called the realm of nothingness. There is nothing there. But that nothingness itself becomes a thought. So you withdraw from that also. That is where you enter that state called neither sensation nor no sensation. That is the threshold of consciousness. And you withdraw from that also. And you come to nothingness. You come to the cessation of sensation and feeling. There is no feeling or sensitivity or sentience. That is the stopping of what is called the mind. Mind is an activity, and that activity stops at that point. And when you come to that point...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah?
How do you go from neither sensation or non-sensation to cessation? How do you go from the eighth jhana to cessation? How do you go from neither perception or non-perception?
What is cessation? What are you calling cessation?
I'm calling cessation no feeling, no perception.
No perception.
Yeah, no perception.
Yeah, that is the cessation of sensation and feeling.
Right. So if you're in neither sensation nor non-sensation, how do you go into no sensation? No sensation.
Now when you say there is neither sensation nor no sensation, is there any sensation there?
It's hard to tell.
Huh?
It's hard to tell. Like
No, it is the state where the sensation, you cannot say the sensation is present or absent. You can't say it is present or absent. That is the meaning of neither sensation nor no sensation.
So
That means that is the threshold of consciousness.
So
That means it's like you're at the door. So when you're at the door, how do you go out of the door?
yeah, how do you withdraw?
So you just withdraw, go beyond that. That means that is the cessation of sensation and feeling. That means that also you let go. You have to understand that this is not a person going anywhere. It is an activity that stops. So it is simply the stopping of an activity. It is not a person going from one place to another. There is no self here. There is only an activity. The activity is like a flame. When the flame stops, where did the flame go?
It just stops.
Because it is an activity that has stopped. It is not a thing that has gone somewhere. So that is what happens, the cessation of things. But then, this activity can start again. So when that activity has stopped, do you know anything? There is no knowledge.
Let's take a short break to enjoy a melodious song entitled Moment of Our Life by Awakenings. This is a very meaningful and devotional hymn. Let's listen to it in admiration of the composers.
Sweet allegiance stride in the warm afternoon of our life, when the road is long and steep. Let us recollect the Master's stride, comforting us without need. In the cool, quiet evening of our life, is done. Under the great body let us lie, searching light that brings thee on. In the slow closing night of our life, and death's things we shall not fear. Keep it close to Buddha's light, till Nibbana Searching light that brings me more. Searching light that brings me more.
Our next segment features Venerable Dr. Chandana as he explains convincingly similarities and differences between two major religions of the world, Buddhism and the Jainism. This is a very interesting talk because the Venerable Dr. Chandana talks about world's major two religions that talk about non-violence, compassion, loving kindness, brotherhood, against cruelty and against violence. Let's enjoy the Master's talk.
Basically, similarities and differences between the Sasana, the Dhamma, and what we see within Jainism. There's many interpretations, depends on who you speak with, of course. Wearing the robes, being a bhikkhu, somebody listening to me or someone like myself, they will say, of course you're going to hold the position of the Buddhist position, you know. Well, that might be the case if we have not studied the texts and the historical background as to where we come from. Many of the terms that we use were used, the terms themselves, the superficial terms, they were already in usage when Lord Buddha began to teach. Sometimes we forget that. But we also neglect to consider that the terms that Lord Buddha used were just the terms that had or kept the similarity factor. The interpretation means everything. That is the juiciest part of everything. That's what matters. I had an aunt, I used to go to her house, and she had this bowl on her kitchen table when I was a child, and I would be hungry, and the bowl would have fruits in it. The only problem was they were not real fruits. You know which ones I'm talking about, the fake ones, plastic. Painted nicely, looks like a pear, glistening, beautiful. You reach for it and it's light. Well, this is not how an apple is supposed to be. Something's wrong. So I would like you to have that idea, approach, when we're talking about the similarities between Jainism and Buddhism. Even though I don't like to use the word Buddhism, but for usage, conventionality's sake, let us. Now, what are some of these terms? Well, we'll start with the most obvious one, Tathagata. We use the word Tathagata thinking that it's only referring to the Buddha. As Buddhists, yes. But it was already in usage at the time of the Buddha. Many people called themselves Tathagata. Nigantanapta, I always have a difficulty, Nigantanapta, which is Mahavira. I like to use it, it's a shorter term. He used to refer to himself as Tathagata, as a Jina. Jina is a conqueror. Conqueror. There's another term we like to use a lot, Kamma, right? The Jains call it karma. That was not a Buddhist term. See, when you want to teach something, you don't have to reinvent everything. To give you a rather conventional or superficial example or mundane example, if you want to start a business, a company, you don't have to start by building the building from scratch where your business is going to be, right? A smart businessman will go ahead and use a building that is already in place. You already saved so much money. You don't have to worry about contracts, engineers, architects, permits. It's already there. Think of it in those terms when we're looking at terms like karma or kamma, as we like to call it in Pali. Now, just to give you a background scene of where Lord Buddha landed, where the sasana began, we have to understand that at the time, prior to the introduction of Buddhism and Jainism, you had two primary ways of thought: to understand, to point out where knowledge could be found. How could knowledge or understanding be introduced into a person's experience? So how can someone know, basically? There were two branches of such knowledge. One was the Brahmanas method, which was mostly about hearing, anussava it's called. Hearing, listening, repeating. You can call it tradition, where later on we're going to talk about the Kalama Sutta. Lord Buddha points that out, based on tradition only, right? Many people believe that. Today, even among Buddhists, us Buddhists, we have that. So we can't just label it as Jainism or this and that sometimes. It's the attitude, the behavior behind it, which I will try to shed some light on later. So you had first this hearing, listening tradition of repeating. But then you had also the Upanishadic tradition, which had a lot to do with perception and inference. Inference is coming up with a conclusion based on secondary or non-direct pieces of evidence. Let's say you hear the alarm, the fire alarm bell go, beep, 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 something like that. And then maybe you smell some smoke. And then you see some people running in the corridor, in the hallway, saying, fire, fire. You go ahead and you say, well, there must be fire. But did you see any fire? No. Now it could be so many different reasons. Those people might be acting. Maybe there's a malfunction with the alarm. We don't know. Maybe the window was left open and a car went by and the carbon monoxide from the back of the car was blown into, by the breeze, into this room. All of which could have easily fooled us. That is inference. So that was more of the Upanishadic, if we use as an example. So these were the two main, if we narrow it down, two ways of thinking and coming up with an understanding about life. Then there was the introduction of the experientialists. That's the category where both Dhamma, or before us, Jainism, and later Buddhism came about. These two. Now, I will try to point out the similarities and the differences. I will only be touching the tip of the iceberg, by the way. It's just very little, because I'm more interested with the human element behind it. And what was the relationship like with Mahavira and Lord Buddha? I'm more interested in that than these similarities, but I will try my best to shed some light. So karma or kamma, you still have today, to this day, people who are in the camp that thinks that kamma is set. Is set. So you have different classes. If you're born in a Sudra class or low class versus a Khattiya or Kshatriya, warrior class, or a Brahmin class, sorry, that's it. The best thing you could do is work towards gaining a better rebirth next time. But in this life, you're stuck with this. So this is to this day valid, thousands of years later. This was also a perspective that people held on to tightly at the time of the Buddha. And then you had the Jainist position towards karma. I say karma because that's how they say it. We call it kamma, but it's the same thing. Now, they don't use the word karma as far as we understand karma, meaning action. For them, it is danda. Danda means a rod, a stick, punishment even, discipline, karma, which they use danda for, the term danda. It could also mean a club, something that you hit. So that's also deterministic. A person is born with different levels of karma. They have an almost, some people say not just almost, really, atomic level karma. So it is basically very tangible, touchable. Karma is so real for them. And the whole objective of life is to chisel, remove more and more karma. And that is where the objective of the spiritual life lies for the Jain person. So imagine your jiva. Jiva is the, think of it as the soul they have. They have two categories of jiva. One is a liberated jiva, the other one is unliberated. Unliberated means a person whose karma has a lot of bonds on it. Bonds are like, they literally say it has a color. It's black, and you have to remove it. How? Well, first of all, those bonds that attach themselves to the jiva of the person, which also are the reasons why you are born the way you are in the class of society that you're born into. So again, it is deterministic. Again, it is not so different than the Brahmins' approach of karma. There's some wiggle room, but still it's very deterministic. It's very fatalistic. It's fate-based, not faith, but fate. It's locked. And they actually live their lives by having the person cut away at the thickness, they call it tightness, of the bond of karma. Well, what types are there? There is loose bond, there is tight bond, there's tighter bond, and there's the tightest bond. And for each of these, there are penance-like actions. Penance means, well, the first one is regret. If a person does something, there is a type of kamma bond where by simply having the regret, that loose type of bond of the kamma comes off. Okay? The second kind is where there is a little bit tight bond on the kamma. For us, it sounds very strange, but this is their belief system when it comes to karma. For those types, which is the second category, which is the tight type of bond on the karma, for that, you need to apologize for whatever you did. So it's very much like penance. When a Catholic goes and confesses, for example, and they apologize at church, it's very similar to that. For the third level, which is tighter category of bond on the jiva of the person, which the person has to work to relinquish, remove, so they can become liberated. For that, they need to do strict austerities. Austerities. What we can call also tapas. They also use that term, by the way, which has to do with heat, where you're dedicating yourself. For example, when you fast, when you don't eat, when you sit in meditation for long hours. What is that? That's applying heat, tapas. You're exerting energy. And then there's the fourth kind, which involves all of them, but especially asceticism. Asceticism, which means you really become like a recluse, and you're really attacking the kamma. Now, but I didn't mention our Buddhist position about karma. How did the interpretation of Lord Buddha differ from what these people were saying? He introduced this thing called cetana. Simple but very important point. He said, it's not deterministic at all. It's not like you're stuck with it. To this day, sometimes I hear people say, oh, it's because of your kamma that you're in this position. Not exactly. That's not a Buddhist position. What happened to your cetana? You had to decide to come here tonight, you know. It's not just your kamma. Kamma is action done in the past. Otherwise, it's very deterministic, fatalistic. So cetana, the mind basically, is the doer of kamma. That is the Buddhist interpretation. Versus this mysterious power that's at play, which is the Jainist perspective. And they spend their whole lives cleansing themselves from the kamma. This is the biggest part of Jainism, because the whole religion revolves around the jiva becoming purified. In order for the person to taste amrita, amrita is immortality. Immortality. In Brahmanism, you have the Brahmin wanting to unite with Mahabrahma. That's their goal, to unite, to become one with Brahma. In Jainism, you don't have that. It's a matter of cleansing so that you become a liberated jiva. They have 24 Tirthankaras. Tirthankaras, the last of whom was Mahavira, who was partly contemporary of Lord Buddha. Partly because he was about 25, 30 years older than Lord Buddha, Mahavira. And I also want to address tonight a few incidents from the suttas that we get, a report as to how did Mahavira treat Lord Buddha. Because we never hear this today in this very open society where we have to just be, yes, let's accept everyone, integrated society, which is good, but we also have to be honest with the data and the real facts. So I would like you to think about those fake apples and the real apples. Years ago, a therapist friend of mine said, trust the behavior, never the words. If you take anything from tonight's talk, I will be happy if that's it. If you take that with you. Never trust only the behavior. Trust the words. Trust the behavior, not the words. A person can come and say, I love you, or I will pay you the money that I owe you. They cry, they beg, you say, okay, fine. Their behavior says something else. But we try to believe and believe and believe. So, looking at Jainist positions or theories or their core beliefs, and then you compare them with what we have today. Before before Buddhism disappeared from India, rather, it didn't happen overnight. It started diluting, it started having other influences coming in, infiltrating into the sasana, into the teachings of Lord Buddha's. And that happens from the inside out and outside in. You have to have individuals who are introducing foreign ideas. Sadly, this was not just happening after Lord Buddha's death. This was happening while he was alive. We neglect to consider this. We have so many monks who show up who are actually teaching people things that have nothing to do with the Dhamma. And then you hear the other bhikkhus saying, no, 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 friend, Avusa, no, you can't say that. This is not what Lord Buddha teaches. What are you teaching? You're teaching soul concept. This is not what Lord Buddha taught. And they go report it to Lord Buddha. One of them is Sati, son of a fisherman. And he actually believed that there is a soul, jumps from one life to the next. And Lord Buddha says, call him over, let's talk to this person. And he says, have you ever heard me say such a thing? So you had all these elements already infiltrated and spreading, especially after Lord Buddha died, to the point where you had what later on became Hindu religion, known as the Hindu tradition, even though there's more, there's thousands of different types of Hinduism. We just use one term to describe them. But they took Lord Buddha and included into their pantheon of deities, where Lord Buddha became an avatar of Vishnu, right? Has nothing to do with any historicity, has nothing to do with Lord Buddha. But, and you have the same thing with pictures of, or sculptures of giants, Mahavira's position, sitting, meditation, and Lord Buddha. It's like the same image. And anybody who has not studied art or that part of that part of the world doesn't know the differences, the slight differences. They wouldn't know the difference. Well, what are we talking about then? Influence. Influence. So when you say to the Buddhists, hey, you're not so different from us. Your Lord, Buddha, is actually, take it easy, he's one of us. Yeah, he's one of us. He's simply an avatar of Vishnu. So we are brothers. So let's come and pray together. Let's have the money come into the same temple. Influence. Ultimately. There's a term in biology, we call it emergence, where you have a group of single-celled organisms who come coalesce together, and all of a sudden they look like they are one single organism. There's billions of them. And when you look at them, you think it's like there's a higher intelligence that's guiding them. There's unifying force behind it. But nature is always trying to coalesce all these elements together. If there is no wisdom, if there is wrong view in this case, and there's a lot of wrong view, unfortunately, a lot of people look at the fake apple, the plastic empty apple, shell of an apple, painted, and say, it's the same as what you're teaching here in the Dhamma. They also have the Sangha, in their Sangha, they also have the sadhus, sadhvis, Shravakas and Shravikas, what we call bhikkhus, bhikkhuni, upasaka, upasika. So you're like us. We're just a difference in terms. No, there's more to it than just a difference in terms. Well, what are they? Remember the danda I mentioned? They don't use, at least in those days, they didn't use the term kamma. We have a few wonderful suttas, specifically from the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle-length discourses. One of them is called Upali Sutta, and the other one is called Abhaya Rajakumara Sutta. 56 and 58, Majjhima Nikaya. Now, in it we see Nigantanatha Putta, Mahavira, surrounded by supporters. And remember, he was there before Lord Buddha became the Buddha. He was born before him. And he had established a community behind him. And many of the royalty, wealthy people, were his supporters. Now, in time, when Lord Buddha began his dispensation teaching, many of these supporters left the Jain camp and went to join Lord Buddha because of what they saw that contradicted what they saw in the behavior of the Jains, contradicting what was being taught behaviorally. Trust the behavior, never the words, right? In the Upali Sutta, we see one of the devout followers of Mahavira. His name was Diga Tapassi. He was a tall ascetic. Diga means long, tall. So he was there at Lord Buddha's presence, and he comes and sits down, and Lord Buddha, as was customary for him, he would like to engage in a conversation. So he asks this Diga Tapassi, whom he knew was a very close student of Mahavira. He says, actually, Diga Tapassi asks Lord Buddha, I think. He says, what is the position between wholesome and unwholesome? How do you categorize unwholesome behavior? And Lord Buddha says, there's 3 categories. There's kayo kamma, to do with the body, kaya. There's vachi, voice, speech, verbal action, kamma. And there's mano, which is mind action, mental action. He says, oh. And out of all these, he asks, which one is the most important? And this is a crucial part, to know the difference. And this is a big difference. This difference is enough to separate those two. Lord Buddha says, out of all these, even though each of them are important, the mind, he says, is number 1. And he asks, really? 3 times. Diga Tapassi asks, do you say it's the mind? Lord Buddha says, yes, it is the mind, Diga Tapassi. In those days when they would debate, 3 times was like concretizing your statement. That's it, you can't back away from that. Now you are committed. And people are listening. And then it's Lord Buddha's turn. And he says, how about you? How does your teacher Mahavira, Nigantanatha Putta, categorize actions? And Lord Buddha uses the word kamma. And Diga Tapassi says, no, Mahavira, my teacher, does not use kamma. And what does he use? He says danda. Danda, which is a rod, a cane, punishment, discipline, depending on the context. It takes, but essentially, they're talking about action. It's just a word that is different. Similarly, and here's another similarity, he says body, danda, speech, verbal danda, and mano, mind danda. And then Lord Buddha asks him, and among these 3, which one does your teacher, Nigantanatha Putta, consider to be the topmost important? And he says, oh, it's the bodily. He says, oh, it's the bodily. Are you saying it's the bodily? So 3 times now Lord Buddha asks him. 3 times, Diga Tapassi says yes. He says, Unfortunately, Diga Tapassi, being so staunchly attached to his teacher's teaching, devout follower, he gets up and leaves. He goes to Mahavira and he recounts all that happened. As he's sitting there, one of his lay supporters, Mahavira's very wealthy supporter, whose family has supported Mahavira and all the Jains prior to him, he gets up and says, Bhante, I will go. I will beat this Gautama. I will prove him wrong. In fact, I will make him your student. I will toss him around, he says, left and right, up and down, and he goes on like several paragraphs where he's basically insulting. But he's so full of confidence. Now Diga Tapasi is smart. He turns and says, no, don't let this man leave your sight, because Gautama, Master Gautama, he has converting magic. Say, what? He converts people. How? Remember, so many wealthy, well-to-do Jain leaders of the community, wealthy princes and businessmen, had switched allegiance. They had left Mahavira and had gone being students of Lord Buddha. One of them being Vappa from, I believe he was from Vesali, and then Siha, the general. And now they were afraid they don't want to lose Upali, because that's so much prestige. So he says, Mahavira, with all his confidence or arrogance, turns to Diga Tapasi and says, no, let him go, I trust him. In fact, he will become his student. And if he's not, he says, I will spew blood, I will vomit blood. That's how confident I am. So this goes back and forth, and finally Upali goes. And Upali goes, and Lord Buddha always had a tradition of asking, is this your position, etc. Now Upali turns and says, Master Gautama, did Diga Tapasi come here? Did he have a conversation, a debate with you? And he says, yes. And what was the topic? This was the topic. Excellent. And then Lord Buddha says, well, would you like to have a short, simple debate here? And Upali, that was the reason why he was there. He says, yes. He says, are you sure? He says, yes. Whatever the outcome? Whatever the outcome. Okay, he says, let's then go ahead. In Jainism, they wear masks long before we're wearing masks. They would avoid drinking cold water because they believed even then that there are microorganisms inside the water. Now, the way they had gone around this was to boil the water. Well, what does the boiling of the water do to any living organisms inside of it? Kills it. That is an accepted practice, in fact, an encouraged practice. And Lord Buddha knew all this, and he says, imagine there's a person who is sick, who's dying of fever, but he is refusing to drink the cold water because he needs to practice what Mahavira teaches. And the man says, Upali says, yes, that's good of him. And he says, what if the man dies? He didn't commit anything, but he followed his mental action, didn't he? Yes, he says. What does your Mahavira say as to where the destination of this person would be after death? He says, he will be born in the highest of realms of devas. So he says, you just admit the fact that by his mental action of choosing not to do something, his mental action of holding tightly to the teaching, that got him to be reborn in the heavenly realms. And he says, no, that's I still believe, he says, that physical action, bodily action is more important than the mental action. And this goes on again and again. And finally, Upali says, Bhante, enough. One example was enough. I just wanted to make sure that I'm sitting with a teacher. I was so impressed by your first example, he says, with the water. And he swears allegiance to Lord Buddha right there. Now, look at the kindness and uniqueness of Lord Buddha's generosity. He says, no, don't become my student yet, because you have supported the giants for you and your family for generations. Upali says, now, Bhante, I love you even more. I respect you even more. Because if it was Mahavira, he would have used me like a banner, moved me from city to city, showing off this very wealthy new student of his. But you're refusing to. And this goes on, and finally Lord Buddha says, okay, next time they come in, please, he says, give them food. And he says, Bhante, I respect you even more, because I heard from Mahavira that Gautama, the Buddha, tells that only merits will come if food is offered to me and my students. But here I am seeing you saying, no, give them food too. You will not see this in the Jain texts. Never. But you will find it in the suttas, because the suttas have tremendously beautiful records of what really happened. And Lord Buddha teaches him about the devas. He first teaches him about dana, and then he teaches him about the benefits of virtue, sila. Slowly, he teaches him the teachings that are unique to Buddha, meaning the Four Noble Truths. And at the end of that talk, Upali sees the Dhamma. He experiences Jnana Dassana. He becomes a Sotapanna. And he bows down to Lord Buddha, and he goes straight to his palace, and he tells his guard, next time Mahavira comes, don't open the gate. Don't give them food until I decide. They cannot come inside, he says. And it's a beautiful sutta. And there's another sutta, Abhaya Rajam Kumara Sutta, where Mahavira does another, he tells one of his students, which happens to be a crown prince, Abhaya Raja. Prince Raja is a crown prince, so he's Abhaya. And Bhaya means fear, Abhaya means fearless. And he tells this prince, go to Gautama, I want you to ask him this question. Does the Tathagata ever use unwelcome words? Words that might sound mean, hurtful to someone who listens, who's addressed in those words? He says, yes, Bhante, I will go. And he also was a big supporter of Mahavira. Now, because it's late, Prince Abhaya is going towards the monastery of where Lord Buddha was. And he says, now it's too late, it's inappropriate. So let me go actually have food prepared and send my servants to announce the time that they could come and have dana in my own palace. And that's what happens.
opinions or concerns, please contact us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. We work hard to share the noble, peaceful, and sublime teachings of the Buddha with you, and helping you persuade the spiritual path under his wisdom. Please encourage and support those interested in the rational and enlightened teachings of the Buddha. We believe our program on Buddha Dharma TV will inspire peace lovers around the globe. Good night. Namo Buddhaya.